a 165-pound manuscript containing all human knowledge written in one night with Satan's help. Fantasy? Nope. The Codex Gigas is real, and its dark power endures to this day. Welcome to the In-Between. I'm Carol Ann, and today we'll unravel the unholy pact that birthed history's most baffling manuscript, known to some as the Devil's Bible. Making a deal with the devil is a concept about as old as the devil himself. Whether it's American blues artist Robert Johnson making a deal at a Mississippi crossroads in exchange for exceptional guitar skills, or Niccolo Paganini, the famous 19th century Italian violinist and composer renowned for his exceptional talents that legend says were the result of a pact with the devil, or the original creator of the Faustian bargain, Faust himself. But what if you're just Herman the monk, otherwise known as Herman the recluse? What would make Herman agree to such a Faustian bargain? Herman is a Benedictine monk in Bohemia, now part of the Czech Republic, who lived in the late 12th and early 13th centuries. And Herman has a problem. I don't know what he did exactly, but whatever he did broke his monastic vows bad enough to earn him a sentence of immurement, which is when they brick you up in a small space and let you starve to death. But Herman doesn't want to go out like that. So at the last second, he makes a deal with the abbot, the head of the monastery. Give me 24 hours and I will write a book for you that contains all of human knowledge. Knowing that the process of copying the text of just the Bible without any illumination, like the fancy decorations and big letters, generally took about a year, plus all the other stuff that Herman would need to include, the abbot took the deal as a no-brainer. When Herman fails, he'll just wall him up tomorrow instead. The legend says that Herman gets to work right away, but by midnight knows there is no way to get the book done. So he calls on Lucifer himself to help him with his task. The devil agrees, and by morning, Herman has finished what is now known as the Codex Gigas, Latin for big book. Now, as far as big books go, the Codex Gigas is not the biggest. Fun fact, the biggest book in the world is actually a series of 730 3.5 foot by 5 foot marble slabs at the Kuthadao Pagoda in Mandalay, Myanmar. The stone pages are a collection of texts known as the Tipitaka, which contains the Pali Canon of Theravada Buddhism. Each slab is housed under its own little pavilion, and you read each one as you walk around the central golden pagoda. The biggest physical book using traditional pages is called This is the Prophet Muhammad, located in Dubai, measures 16.4 feet wide, 26.4 feet long, and weighs approximately 3,300 pounds. The biggest book by word count is called In Search of Lost Time, written by Marcel Proust, starting in 1913 with the publication of the first of 7 volumes, which has a word count that exceeds 1.2 million words. That's double the size of War and Peace, which comes in at a paltry 587,000. All that being said, the Codex Gigas does take the award for largest surviving medieval manuscript. And it deserves it. Legends aside, this thing is impressive and used to be considered one of the wonders of the world. Still is by some. This thing is 36 inches long, 20 inches wide, and almost 9 inches thick. The 620 pages are made of vellum, 310 sheets of it to be exact, which means the skins of at least 160 either donkeys or calves. It used to have 320 sheets or 640 pages, but somewhere along the line, someone decided to remove 10 sheets. More on that later. And the front and the back covers are wooden slabs wrapped in ornately stamped leather with metal decorations. All together, making this bad boy tip the scales at 165 pounds. What's in it? Well, It supposedly houses the entirety of human knowledge at that point when it was written, which is somewhere between 1204 and 1230. The first page has 2 Hebrew alphabets, as well as the early Cyrillic alphabet and the Glagolitic alphabet, which is the earliest known Slavic alphabet. It contains copies of at least 20 other works, including a copy of the Vulgate Bible, which is the complete Latin Bible as translated by St. Jerome in the 4th century, which is the main part of the manuscript. It also has 2 books by Romano-Jewish scholar Flavius Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews and the Jewish War, written in the 1st century that detail the history of the Jews. It has the Etymology by Isidore of Seville. He was a 7th century scholar, and his book is his attempt at creating an encyclopedia of all knowledge of his time. It also has the Chronicle of Bohemia by Cosmas of Prague, which is a history of the Bohemian region up to the year 1125. It has a section on medicine that includes writings about treating illnesses, which blends folklore with what was then understood about medicine. It includes texts on exorcism, has a calendar, a list of death records, and even some magic formulas. It has the monastic rules, which are instructions and rules for monks written by Saint Benedict of Nursia. And it contains some local records and some general reference information. Not a bad list. And apart from the alphabets at the start, the entire book is in Latin. But the part I find most interesting is the writer's admission to his own sinfulness. It is 5 whole pages, completely different in appearance than the other pages, written in all caps, twice as large as the rest of the text. The penitent confession of a devout man fighting the forces of evil, admitting his transgressions, big and small, including pride, envy, gluttony, lust, fornication, and bestiality. Ooh. Maybe that's why they wanted to wall him up. And even though the writer's confession might seem a tad bit out of place in this mostly religious text, it was actually very common at the time for monks to devote their lives to copying religious text or creating new ones as a way to serve their penance as sinners. So maybe that's what Herman was doing. Now, all of that knowledge in one place is a pretty impressive accomplishment, but that is not what gives this book its notoriety. That comes from the 19-inch portrait of the devil, which is where it gets its nickname, the Devil's Bible. It's not very often, either then or now, for a Bible to devote that much real estate to a picture of Satan himself. But don't go off the rails just yet, because right on the facing page is an equally large picture of heaven based on the account given by John in the book of Revelation. Why are there no people? The legend says that in addition to Herman's soul, the devil also insisted his picture be included prominently in the book. Or another version says that the portrait was Herman's way of thanking the devil for his help. However, scholars hypothesize that the 2 pictures are meant to give the reader a clear choice: the rewards of heaven or the punishments of hell. But whatever the intent of these 2 pictures was, they are by far the most popular pages in the book because those 2 pages are significantly darker than the others due to the amount of light that has hit their faces from being viewed so much. Interestingly, the author's confession comes right before the illustration of heaven, and the magical incantations and instructions for exorcism come right after the portrait of the devil. And the pictures of heaven and the devil are the only full-page drawings in the entire book. Also of note, there's only one portrait of a person, which is believed to be that of Josephus. Usually the author is pictured somewhere with his name attached, but not in this book. And why Josephus, not any of the other people whose writings were included? And one more mystery is the missing 10 pages I mentioned earlier. Originally, it was thought that when the book was chucked out of the castle window to save it from the fire, a story I'll get to in just a minute, that the 10 pages fell out and were lost. However, modern scholars have concluded that those pages were individually cut from the binding, leaving everyone to wonder just what was on them that was so secretive that they had to be removed. Rumor has it that the pages contained the devil's prayer, ancient text recited to summon the devil himself, or some other information that might be considered blasphemous by the Catholic Church. That is entirely possible, but 10 pages of that tiny text seems like it would hold more than just a satanic incantation. But who knows? Now, I'm sure it's no surprise that a book with such a strange origin story would also contain a legend of a curse. That's right, the book is said to be cursed, the history of which goes something like this. Not long after the book's creation, the Benedictine monastery in Podlajice, Bohemia, where Herman had lived, is broke. To pay the bills, the monks decide to pawn their most precious possession, the Codex Gigas, to a Cistercian monastery in Sedlec. Unfortunately, the Benedictines in Podlice can't pay back the loan, so the Cistercians keep it. By the end of the 13th century, the book is moved to another monastery in Brevnov. None too soon, since like 100 years later, the Cistercian monastery is sacked in the Hussite Wars of 1419 through 1433. That was a close one. The book stays in Brevnov until 1593, when the monks loan it to the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II in Prague, who collects everything from animals, living and dead, to paintings, sculptures, and other weird curiosities. And if you're a regular viewer of this channel, you may remember good old Rudolf II. He's the guy that was the original owner of the Voynich manuscript, another mysterious book we covered in a previous episode. There's a link to that episode in the description if you want to check that out too. Of course, to the monk's bad luck, Rudolf never returned the book. He actually never had any intention of returning it. Why? Rudolf became obsessed with the Codex as part of his broader obsession with the occult. And in hindsight, now makes perfect sense why he was also the owner of the Voynich manuscript. However, his numerous years of dabbling in the dark arts takes its toll, and as both the King of Croatia and Bohemia and the Holy Roman Emperor starts to flake out and is overthrown by his own family in 1612. Rudolf dies with the Codex Gigas still in his possession, but 6 years later, the 30 Years' War begins and ends in 1648 with the Swedish army seizing the late Rudolf's entire collection of books, including the Codex Gigas, and bringing everything back to the Royal Library in Stockholm, which is inside their royal castle. But the curse isn't finished. In 1697, the royal castle catches fire, and the fire spreads to the Royal Library. Many rare books are lost, but the librarian, in an effort to save the Codex Gigas, threw it out the library window where it falls on and injures some poor guy who is in the wrong place at the wrong time. Told you I'd get back to that one. In 1878, the Royal Library and the National Library of Sweden kind of merge, and the book is transferred to the National Library of Sweden, where, other than a whole 3.5-month loan to the National Library of the Czech Republic in Prague, it has remained ever since. So in essence, the curse is one bankruptcy, 2 wars, and a house fire over the span of 800 years. That's a pretty low bar. If that's the standard for being cursed, then my life is way more cursed than that. I think the only individual who has the right to call it a curse is the guy who got smashed under it while minding his own business just walking home from work. But then again, maybe I'm being a little too quick on that skeptic trigger, because I also found information that the book managed to enchant not only Rudolf II, but also Queen Christina of Sweden, who was on the throne when the Codex Gigas was brought home as spoils of the 30 Years' War in 1648. Maybe, just maybe, the book had something to do with her abdicating the throne at the age of 28 and running to Rome to join the Catholics. That was a pretty bold move back then. In 1858, a book was published called Preposterous Anecdotes. Now, just a quick note. I can't find any mention of this book anywhere, except in relation to the Codex Gigas. Normally, that would sound pretty sus. But it's also used as a source for this story in the very documentary produced by the National Library of Sweden and posted on their website, which, for me, kind of puts it back in the credible category. And I don't know anything about this book, but I can't help but feel like it was a book that documented strange encounters, like every episode of this show. Anyway, Preposterous Anecdotes tells the story of a guard at the library where the codex is kept, who has an encounter that changes him forever. He fell asleep on the job and had gotten himself locked in the library overnight. When he finally wakes up a few hours later, he sees books floating around as if they're dancing on invisible strings. And the epicenter of this paranormal production? You guessed it. The Devil's Bible, along with the devil himself. When the library staff come to work and open the doors in the morning, they find the guard hiding under a table, completely unhinged. He tries to tell them what he saw, but it all just sounded like rambling nonsense. Poor guy lost his job and his mind. About 15 years later, shortly before its final move to the National Library of Sweden, the book became the obsession of a royal librarian named August Sternberg. One day, while Sternberg's giving a friend of his a tour of the library, he shows them the Devil's Bible. Today, it's under glass, but back then it was just out in the open for everyone to look at. Sternberg walks his friend over to the book, opens its cover, and starts flipping through the enormous pages. And as he's showing off the beautiful illustrations, he leans in close to the book and whispers to his friend, "Can you hear the voices?" So maybe it's cursed, maybe it's not, but let's tackle the elephant in the room. Are the stories actually true? Did Herman the recluse write this 640-page book in one night? Well, we have a few things to look at for clues in either direction. First, let me clarify that there are a couple of variations of the origin story. Some have Herman writing the book in a day, while others have him writing it in a year. But either way, whether it's midnight on the same day or midnight on the last day of the year, Herman still calls on the devil for help. Of course, the other option is that he didn't write it in a day, that it actually took him the 20 to 30 years that scholars estimate it would take to write a book of that size with so much illumination. I just learned that word, so I have to use it. So much intricate artwork. So let's start by taking a closer look at Herman. The Codex Gigas does not have a name inscribed anywhere that tells us who wrote it. Not uncommon, as the job of copying religious texts was supposed to be about the glorification of God, not the fame of the scribe. But that means we have no way of knowing if Herman is actually the guy who created the book. His name, Hermanus Inclusus, in Latin, is in the book, but it's in the necrology, which is basically a log of when various individuals have died. Of course, people have interpreted the name as Herman the Recluse, which, let's be honest, sounds like a totally fitting name for a monk. But the inclusus part of Hermanus Inclusus doesn't necessarily mean what we think of when we hear the word recluse today. Inclusus, in Latin, could mean one of two things. Either terrible punishment, like being bricked up behind a wall, or voluntary removal from society, which was pretty common occurrence for monks. But we have no way of knowing which of these two meanings was appropriate in Herman's case. The terrible punishment version sure lends itself well to the done-in-a-day legend, but it could just as easily have been Herman voluntarily removing himself from society to devote the 20 to 30 years it would have taken to write this book as a form of penance for his numerous confessed sins. But let's put Herman on hold for just a tick. We'll come back to him in a minute. First, we need to talk about the handwriting. Modern scholars have analyzed the writing in the book and have concluded that the entire thing was written by the same person. It is completely uniform throughout. Okay, so it was written by one guy. But here's the kicker that I haven't heard mentioned by anyone else yet. If Herman's name and date of death is in the book, and the entire thing was written by the same person, then either Herman knew exactly what day he was going to die and could add his own obituary, or Herman didn't write the book. But before you go away all bummed out because I just ruined the legend for you, that's not quite the end of the story. Scholars have taken their analysis one step further by adding that not only was it written by one person, but it was written in a relatively short amount of time. As a person ages, their handwriting changes with age, even if it's just a bit. Either arthritis kicks in, or their eyesight starts to fade, or if none of that happens, then your technique actually tends to improve when you have 20 years of practice under your belt. But those signs of change over time are not present in this penmanship. From front cover to back, the writing is perfectly uniform, like one person wrote it in a very short amount of time, like in a day. So, did Herman pull off the impossible with the help of Satan? Maybe. Maybe his sins were so egregious that the monks decided to execute him anyway. And maybe Herman knew what day it was going to be, so he added his name to the list of dead people. Or maybe it was another monk who knew just who to call for help to achieve this insurmountable task. Only the devil knows. Legend aside, this book is absolutely gorgeous. I haven't really had Sweden high on my bucket list up to now, but I think it just moved up a few spots because I would love to go see this amazing book up close. And if you found this mysterious book fascinating, I highly suggest you watch this video next, the Voynich manuscript. This thing is awesome on a totally different level of bizarre, with tiny naked dancing ladies in a language that no one can decipher. Go check it out. Seriously. Be careful out there. And I will see you here again on the In-Between.